So today we're talking about the role women have to play, obviously, in the climate agenda, but particularly how we can use trade and cooperation to forward gender equality, both at home and abroad. This event's obviously focused on green trade and climate action, but obviously those issues, are just many of the issues that women face in the workplace. They're not unique to climate change. I'm not going to say climate change is one of the greatest issues we face today. You all know that. That's why you're here. But actually, as we reimagine the way that we do business, we also should reimagine the way we think about gender equality. So we do hear a lot about just transition, a fair and equitable transition to net zero. Women and girls are more often face the brunt of climate change. They're the shock absorbers of climate. It impacts them disproportionately. They're the people who are most likely to collect water, food, fuel, all of which are becoming scarcer, more expensive. Women are more likely to face poverty and financial insecurity, which means they're less adaptable to the changes that are happening in the world. And, that means that because those things are impacting women more, they need to be involved in the strategic planning and decision making. So as the UK continues to embark on its free trade agenda, Global Britain has a duty to champion equality around the world. So where we do deals with New Zealand or Australia or soon the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's important that both the environment and gender equality are included as standard in all those trade deals, and ensure that if you want to do business with the UK, you respect the rights of women and our duty to the environment. Also, free trade, of course, agenda, a massive opportunity for more female leadership roles. We hope it's going to create more opportunities to do business, but also that we'll see women take up those senior positions on company boards. So as I'm going to quote the Irish President Mary Robinson, much quoted, climate change is a man-made problem that demands a feminist solution. Ooh. So today we're going to hear from three fantastic women on our panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and say a few words. But of course, we also want to hear from you and your experiences. Once they've said a few words, I'll ask them a couple of questions, but mainly we'll come to the room and hear from you. So, thank you. Since she's directly to my right, I'll start with Emily.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the British Chambers of Commerce for inviting me here today and to be on this excellent panel and to join all of you. So, the select crew. So, it's also a real pleasure to be here at the City of Glasgow College. I was reading about the history of the college and its predecessors, and most notably, I don't know if you know, it used to be the Glasgow College of Nautical Studies. As some of you will know, that while the old Nautical College specialised in courses like marine engineering, it also taught numerous other vocational courses as well, from hairdressing and childcare to computing and electronics. But obviously none of those studies were captured by the college's name. So instead they tried to sum it up in the college's motto. And the motto was nautical and so much more. And reading about that, I was also reminded of something very appropriate for our discussion today, something that I read about a few months ago in my current role as Shadow Trade Secretary. It was a call for assistance on Twitter from a woman called Anna Stellinger, who's Deputy Director General of one of Siobhan's sister organisations in Sweden, the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. And she tweeted this. Anna tweeted, "Hey trade wonks on Twitter," which, believe me, is more effective than you might think. There's an awful lot of them out there. And so she got their attention, and then Anna asked them what trade and X issues are here to stay and make no sense at all. And she gave two examples of issues that she thought were here to stay, and funnily enough, they were trade and climate, and they were trade and gender. But the third on her list was trade and question mark, and she invited the trade wonks to provide their thoughts on it. Now, some people said that trade related to everything, you know, the Glasgow Nautical College answer, if you like, trade and so much more. Other people provided specific ideas: trade and development, trade and security, human rights, animal welfare, conflict, to name but a few. And of course, some people just said that Anna had asked completely the wrong question, but that's what Twitter is like. And some of the male respondents explained to Anna just how trade works, but that's just how men are like. But the answers that I found most interesting were from some of the proper wonks who drilled into the entire concept of trade and X, as opposed to what one described as pure trade. And personally, one of them said, I think most of the trade and X issues are here to stay, which is a good thing, because trade doesn't operate in a vacuum. Another agreed, but with a note of caution. Some good can be done, they said, but expecting trade and X agenda to solve all of these questions is overly ambitious. Another saw it both ways. Trade is so all-embracing and impacting other issues that it inevitably needs to be considered, he said. But it is when trade and X become more about the X, then that we should challenge that. And a final respondent went much further, and I want you to remember this comment. What he said was, as for nonsensical trade and X topics, he said, I am more concerned about the bogus justifications they create for countries to justify protectionism. So, some of those trade wonks might be sceptical, might be more than sceptical, if they could see us here today, not just discussing trade and X, but discussing trade and two X's, as we look towards the intersection between trade, climate, and gender equality. But at the risk of upsetting them, I have come to realise actually something quite profound over the last year that I've been doing this job, and since I read that exchange on Twitter, and I found myself dealing with a lot of trade and X issues in this current job. And I've come to realise that we will never realise the full potential that trade offers us to create a better world as long as we stay trapped in the trade and X mentality. If X is always a bolt-on and an afterthought or a side issue, just like childcare and computing at the Nautical College, the fight against climate change and gender discrimination are never going to receive the focus that they should through the trade system, as long as they are still part of and so much more. And I believe that this is the stage that we've got to right now. We've all seen in government press releases hailing its trade deal with Japan or its agreement in principle with New Zealand as a major breakthrough on gender because of the contained chapters on women's empowerment. We've all heard the debates recently about whether the chapter on climate change in the trade deal with Australia will go far enough. And we're aware that CPTPP trade bloc, which the government wants to join, gets its full name, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, because it contains a chapter on climate and a chapter on development with a subsection on gender. And I'm not saying that those chapters and subsections don't matter, or that the commitments that they contain can't make a difference. We all hope that they can. But I think that the level of ambition on those issues is a million miles away from where they need to be. I believe that we can move away from issues like climate and gender being the subjects of optional chapters or subsections, which may or may not be added to trade agreements, and get to the point where those kinds of issues are the driving forces behind the entirely new approach to what those trade agreements are designed to achieve. Imagine if our starting point with trade agreements was for two or more like-minded countries to come together and discuss the shared challenges and opportunities in front of them and produce a set of common, integrated objectives to work towards, ranging from the economic empowerment of women to the effective protection of the environment. In fact, rather than reinvent the wheel each time, those countries could simply take as their starting point the Sustainable Development Goals. Work out which are the most relevant in their own circumstances and make those the driving force of each agreement. And with those foundations, think how the discussion would change. When they came to a chapter on financial services or the chapter on agricultural exports, with a so-called pure trade mindset, we might get the usual cut and paste commercial arrangements in those respective areas. But if we had a mindset that was geared towards the objectives of gender equality or climate change or other progressive goals, we are much more likely to see issues like climate finance and microcredit woven into those agreements on financial services, and issues like solar rate erosion and fair pay for female workers woven into commitments on agriculture. And before any of Anna Stellinger's trade wonks complain that this would distract from the role of these deals in breaking down trade barriers and stimulating economic growth, I ask the question, why? Why? The Sustainable Development Goals are as much about creating jobs and promoting industry as they are about educating young girls and saving our planet. They are just rightly seen as, they just rightly see all those objectives moving towards with greater strength when done together, and exactly the same should be true of trade agreements, which see climate and gender as central to their purpose, not as bonus decorations to add on at the end, a bit of flourish, a bit of fluff. And one of the critical reasons we need to reach that point is to get away from the position we find ourselves often at present, where the various and X elements of these deals are seen as standing in isolation from each other, and sometimes even in opposition to each other. To take one important example, look at the International Labour Organization's 2015 paper on gender equality and green jobs, which rightly warned that the drive to create new jobs in clean energy, green technology, and low-emission cars had to go hand in hand with efforts to correct the huge inequalities of opportunity for women in those industries. To take another example, look at the CPTPP trade bloc I mentioned earlier, where the 11 founding members were so pleased with their subsection on gender that they chose International Women's Day to sign the agreement in 2018. But there was rightly anger among many women's groups in those 11 countries, because despite the specific recognition of gender issues in Article 23.4 of the CPTPP, for those who want to know, the rest of the agreement was the same old story of women's livelihoods and security being ignored or undermined, especially in a chapter on agriculture, which was geared to the interests of big corporations and not small farmers. It is a basic but important point that the best way to stop gender and climate objectives from coming into conflict with other issues or each other is to take them out of their silos or their individual chapters and address them together. That's what we're doing at this event, and that's what we should be doing at every trade agreement, in every meeting of the World Trade Organization, the G7, the G20, and in every discussion, in my view, at COP. As well as the issues of women's job opportunities and economic security, there are a range of other trade issues which urgently need to be looked at over the next fortnight through that gender lens. So the first and the most obvious, we must demand action at this summit to deliver on the commitments made at Copenhagen. I was at Copenhagen. It was so many years ago. But we made commitments on funding for climate resilience and adaptation in the global south, including financial support for the transition to net zero. And the human face that we must put on that demand belongs to the faces of women and girls, who make up the vast majority of the world's poorest people, and those most vulnerable to the threat from climate change. The promise at Copenhagen was made to those women, and 12 years later, they have to be honoured. And second, and related to that, we have to make the case for concerted action and investment to enable the transition to sustainable farming practices, with women in the vanguard and every agrarian community given the support they need to maintain production while curbing emissions. And we can support that by giving developing countries access to our markets, not through free trade deals, but on a unilateral basis, so that they can retain the tariffs they need to support jobs in farming and other key industries, while women workers are the largest beneficiaries. Third and finally, it is a sad reality that, away from the good intentions of this summit, there are many supportive businesses represented here, but there are powerful corporations who will resist any attempts to interfere with the profits that they make at the expense of both our planet and our fellow human beings. So therefore, we must have robust laws which penalise companies who are failing to police their own supply chains, who allow products to reach our shelves and homes, which derive from the destruction of our natural environment or from the abuse and exploitation of vulnerable workers, most of them being women. These are just some of the immediate steps we need to see, and they should be just the start of the fundamental change in mindset that we need to put gender, climate, and other progressive goals at the heart of our approach to trade, in my opinion. Like all changes of mindset, that will take time. But the one that we can't afford to do is to go in the opposite direction and revert to a position where these and X issues are not allowed to interfere with the functioning of so-called pure trade. Which brings me to my final point, which I want to stress in this non-partisan gathering, is nothing to do with party politics and is just about the mindset that we need. After all, Angela Merkel and Jacinda Ardern exist in very different places on the political spectrum. But if every world leader at COP this fortnight showed as much leadership on climate change as they do, then we would have no concerns about the outcome. The scale of the combined challenge on climate change and gender inequality is so big, so important, so widespread across the world that our political affiliations should not come into it. All that matters is whether each of us in a position of responsibility grasps the scale of the challenge and accepts the role that we have to play in facing up to it. Denial of that responsibility should not be an option, and that goes in particular for our Foreign Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities, who holds more responsibility on both of those issues than most. When Liz Truss came to Glasgow 3 months ago, she chaired a meeting of the government's Board of Trade just down the road at the Trades Hall, with that renowned champion of gender equality, the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. They were there to launch the government's report on green trade, a 52-page report with 7 pages of pictures and just 2 pages of recommendations, billed as providing the definitive analysis on the role of trade in tackling climate change. Unsurprisingly, the words gender, female, women, or equality didn't appear once in that report, and also missing was any discussion of some of the critical issues on the green trade agenda, from carbon border taxes and due diligence laws to investor-state dispute settlements and the Energy Charter Treaty. But for me, the denialism of that report was summed up in just 30 words and fewer than 280 characters in the tweet that Liz Truss issued from Glasgow that day. She said this: "Free markets and free trade are the best way to create a better environment, spreading innovation and ideas. That's why we need to challenge green protectionist policies that impede trade." In other words, it is not just that climate issues or gender issues or any other and X issues should not be allowed to interfere with pure trade. The argument is that if you allow pure trade to take its course, despite all the mountains of evidence to the contrary, all those issues will naturally be resolved. I couldn't disagree more. And when I talk about the need for a change in our mindset, that is the best example of what I mean. That's why I believe today's discussion is so important. That's why I'm very grateful to be part of it. And that's why I hope Liz Truss and everyone else in a position of responsibility on those issues will be listening to what we have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause. Yeah, that was fantastic. We've already got so much to think about, and we've still got 2 more amazing panelists to hear from. I love the thought of moving from trade plus X to the SDGs as a framework. I think that we, don't use that SDG framework enough when we're thinking about anything at all.
Follow that, did you say?
I thought that, I did not say. No, not at all. Absolutely not. So delightful to have you with us. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. I'm Sue Lawton and I chair World Business Women, which is a part of Savitas. And Savitas is a not-for-profit. We create business connections and opportunities primarily for women-owned businesses, but we do invite men to join in the pleasure of creating new business as well. World Business Women was set up at the start of the pandemic because we could see all our global networks slipping away. So we've done something about it. And we've had some wonderful discussions promoting women-owned business, connecting women, and really becoming a global hub for any female entrepreneur wanting to make connections around the world. So I'm all about gender. And it's 15 years since The Economist wrote, "Forget India, China, and the internet. Economic growth will be driven by women." Well, I believed that then, and I still believe it now, but it's taken a bit longer than I was anticipating it. And of course, then we had the pandemic. And I'm not asking for anything special. I'm just asking for some equality. Equal access to finance, equal access to contracts, equal access to markets, and equal shared caring responsibilities. And the answer is simple. All we have to do is convince the other 49% of the population that this is the way forward. The pandemic, though, may be creating the power shift opportunity. Throughout it, people have started to reflect on the lifestyle choices and their priorities. A 2013 Unlimited study showed that women launch businesses to gain a better balance in their work and family life. Wealth is not the primary focus or driver. And I suggest that now is the time for women to step forward and to drive this business culture shift. Purpose versus profit, stability and sustainability before growth at any price. Women are definitely going in the right direction. 54% of women stated that beyond financial returns, reducing their carbon footprint is at the top measure of success when investing, compared to just 41% of men. But if women entrepreneurs are to contribute to this global change in business practice, we still have a lot of catching up to do to maximise the opportunities as they arise. The OECD figures say 33% of SMEs are women-owned, but only 27% of that 33 are prepared for climate change. So let's think about what these inequalities are and what we want and need to do about them. Access to finance is crucial, but for many it's not accessible. It continues to be a major problem in emerging economies, but it's also impacting women in the UK. Women receive only 2.3% of VC funding, and that figure is falling. Investors hunker down and stick with their old networks. Yet, when they are funded, women's businesses ultimately deliver higher revenue and more than twice as much return per pound as invested. If we cannot attract investment into our businesses, they will not grow. And that investment growth is an opportunity lost. But I have to recommend here today the president of Indonesia, who stood up at the G20 and supported investment and finance into women-owned business. I think we've got a new global champion. Access to contracts is also at an interesting stage. Women are estimated to be less than 1% of the global supply chain. Work to change this is being done through organisations such as WeBank, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council in the USA, and We Connect International that works throughout the rest of the world, but it's got a long way to go. Because global data is missing to support and measure future growth programmes. In the UK, we failed to get the simple question, are you a woman-owned business, in the annual tax return when it was digitised, so there's no great progress there. The next challenge to be faced will impact all SMEs, contracting with major corporations as they begin to ask, what are your green credentials when bidding for new contracts? The USA is the world leader in supplier diversity, so let's take a look at America and see if we can learn some answers. WeBank partners with WIP, Women Impacting Public Policy, and this standalone organisation lobbies on behalf of women entrepreneurs and has had some major success, such as the 10% set aside for women entrepreneurs entrepreneurs for some of the federal government contracts. It's a separate organisation solely focused on the promotion of women entrepreneurs and their greater inclusion in national, multinational, corporate and government supply chains. Major corporations are also taking their part in it, in the supplier diversity world. PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electricity, have a broad set of trainings focusing on supplier inclusion on offer and are just updating their Diverse Supplier Go Green programme to embrace the recommendations from COP26. All their trainings are there on their website. They're accessible for all and they are for free. And many of the major organisations and corporations in the USA offer this same free training. There's also the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which also offers advice and guidance on sustainable procurement. It's a membership organisation, but there's lots of information there for free, or you could become a member. But some women entrepreneurs in the UK are already ahead of the game. Jill Thorpe, founder and CEO of the Sourcing Team, says, "The Sourcing Team is a global ethical sourcing company working with like-minded clients that care about their brand, their customers, their staff, and the planet and its people. We think what sets us apart is being at the forefront of sustainable and ethical sourcing, where we build supply chain production methods that protect human rights and improve environmental impacts. Part of this is to push boundaries to find the right factories, conduct robust audits, but importantly, through our Beyond Audit programme, work with them on a journey of constant improvement to collaboratively find more sustainable solutions. We have women champions." But not to be totally outdone by the USA, the UK also has corporations stepping up to the plate. NatWest, based here in Scotland, have a raft of green initiatives, including carbon tracking, working with their clients to track their carbon usage and help SMEs measure their carbon footprint. On October the 21st, we held the second of the World Business Women Days, this time focusing on climate change and the challenges facing women entrepreneurs. 25 countries were represented, and out of it came a green paper that's been submitted to COP26. But here are some of the headlines. We want to see a kite mark style app to bring global standards, enabling us all to make the right decisions and help save the planet. And Savitas is collaborating with Wishknish, a woman-owned technology company, to develop a fully transparent and validated blockchain solution to deliver this application. We think award-winning accreditation to businesses who practice sustainability will inform consumers. And remember, women make 70 to 80% of all the consumer purchasing decisions. So it'd be wise to inform them of your business credentials and to lead more businesses to follow that example. Additionally, a matchmaking service could be introduced so that large companies with a sustainable agenda could easily locate women-led sustainable SMEs for collaboration. So let's finally revisit why support women in enterprise and climate change. Well, first of all, if all countries match the growth rate of the fastest improving country in gender equality, as much as 11% of annual GDP could be added to the global economy by 2025. Secondly, via women and their balanced approach to business, addressing climate change will be at the forefront of business priorities. And thirdly, 49% of the population will see just how much can be gained by creating an equal society. We are few in this room, but it doesn't mean that we cannot influence many. So let's think of the words of Portia in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, who said, "How far that little candle throws his beams, so shines a good deed in a weary world." Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Again, amazing food for thought there, and some really great to hear some great examples of where you're seeing it done well. Well, Mary, there we go.
Tell you what, having read all about and watched Emily over the years and the latest tweets and a strictly Saturday tweet, which, by the way, I agreed with.
Thank you.
And then there was Sue. I thought, where do I come from in this panel today? And what I decided to do is maybe a little bit of, I'll be a bit of a case study, because I'm not the expert on international trade, and also in terms of from what we've just heard from Sue as well. But to give a bit of background, so who am I? I've said that a few times actually in front of camera, and said, and said, for a minute, who actually am I? But I currently am the CEO of Porterbrook. And Porterbrook owns about a quarter of the country's rolling stock. So we're a private entity. But if I rewind back, I've been in business over 30 years now, and it's always been in a very sort of male-dominated environment, service sector and then trains, for the last 25 years. And the things that you learn in wanting to be a future leader, as we all we aspire to, is about the balance of perspective and the balance of working with people. And I didn't particularly start out in careers about this balance of gender and equality and where we all have to fit within organisations. But you work it out as you go forward and you learn your lessons. And I have to say I work with some outstanding female colleagues in the industry and some not such outstanding. And the flip side, of course, are my male colleagues. I've got some brilliant people that I've worked with over the years and some pretty lousy. So that it's everything I always find is about balance and perspective. But looking at where we are today, and so why I think that I'm a bit of the case study, because sadly I'm one of the few senior leaders in this particular industry that's been around as long. I am now regarded as the veteran and on the descendancy, and that's fine because you want to leave legacies of support and hopefully some of the good elements of what you've done. I used to stand up at conferences, well I thought it was funny because it was generally always male, and say, my train set's real and yours is in the lot. And actually, we're laughing and we think that's quite funny, it didn't really go down very well. And I just thought, I talk about football. I was at Pride Park because one of her offices in Derby, and I tried to start talking about football and the World Cup and got stony silence because that's not what I'm supposed to be talking about. And neither could I really, so I moved away from that subject. But I think that what I really wanted to say is our business that I've been leading for the last 4 years is an organisation that's been around. It's one of the parts of privatisation, and it has been there to leverage that support of private funding. And I think private funding will come into that debate, I'm sure, shortly. Is very important to support the climate, the green economy, and so it should, and be held to account though in doing so, on balance. But when I joined the business 4 years ago, and prior to that had run many from an operational perspective, so I'd been on the other side of this, I felt that we were a bit lax. We were just a financier, we weren't looking at our responsibilities, we weren't considering our approach. These are assets that you buy that should have a sustainable life of over 30 years, so if we're talking about the whole circular economy, we shouldn't procure these very expensive pieces of metal and then just decide that we don't need them a few years down the road, because it has a whole impact on the supply chain. We currently have only 170 people in our business, but we work with over 7,000 UK employees doing many things for us. And it's a very, very important part of the whole UK supply chain, because we're putting through about £150 million worth of work just into base supplies every year, and that's supporting jobs in the UK economy. But I felt that we were not thinking about where do we go to the future and how do we actually reposition ourselves as not just seen as some cold financier that doesn't take any accountability or risk. Because I've always felt, and one of my successes as a leader is saying, take responsibility, take accountability, and be strong enough and resilient enough. And that might also come from the fact that I'm the youngest out of 2 sisters. I've got 2 older sisters, and they were brutal to me growing up. Maybe it was easier, or maybe it taught you some life skills having 2 older sisters. And I think that's something from a gender perspective, that we have a great resilience and we're prepared to actually look at a broad base of when you're in difficulty in business or when you're having successes, how you include and become inclusive. And I think what we're doing as an individual organisation with our shareholders, who are a global group of shareholders, pension funds. So it's a lot of it is public pension funds, and have a very strong ESG approach, is very much saying, where does our business go in the future? And one of the things that I recognised about Porterbrook is to take us into this next phase of being seen as being relevant and supporting, so bringing in truly private finance into a public-private, very important part of rail within the UK. Talking about, from an emissions perspective, we're here on a climate conference. Yes, transport's only 1.4% of total UK emissions, and it is the cleanest, greenest form of transport today, but it still has to provide its own source of improvement and enhancements, and it can do. We're pushing boundaries, and I will say it, Siobhan, because you weren't there. One of our first meetings was going to be on our hydrogen train, but it's not here today, but it will be later in the week. I'll just get it out now.
Yeah, no mentioning of trains.
No, well, do you know what?
No, we're not mentioning it.
It's hard. It is hard, Ronnie, but this is pushing boundaries, because the other thing that I've wanted to do is take a private organisation, create a skill and a mindset of innovation, look at a whole circular economy that supports my whole decarbonisation agenda to support a net zero position of government, and push boundaries. And I'm doing that with a workforce that's currently a gender base of 32% of our workforce is female. And my leading engineers are currently building, the masterminds behind our hydrogen train, which is an £8 million investment with no commercial contract. I haven't got any outlet. I've decided, build it, and then it's difficult to not have the conversation about alternative traction to both just electricity and then to diesel. And that is what we're bringing up later on this week and then showcasing throughout COP. Wasn't asked to do it, but I just decided to do it and basically forced myself in. Porterbrook's not an official sponsor. There's actually not any sponsorship, there's not actually any visualisation of Porterbrook on this train. I've done this for UK government and in partnership with Network Rail to say you have to showcase what is the world's first heavy rail tri-mode of electric battery through hydrogen brought to say this is one of our futures. And that has been done with a workforce with some fantastic engineers, as I said, who are led by a female job share team who are just an amazing group of individuals. But I think my point here on this case study is that we are actually delivering a very successful business model back to our shareholders. We have to be able to give that return back because the pension funds, it has to turn round. That's the way it works. But we've taken, coming back to your point earlier, Sue, a very balanced perspective of how we're looking at our business today, our business tomorrow, and looking at the whole ESG approach to it. And I'm finding now from the financial markets, and we've done a lot of debt raising, that institutions are becoming much more increasingly concerned about not just the environmental element of ESG, but the whole social element. And if we're talking about the green economy and the sustainability, inclusivity and gender, I actually do believe it's becoming a much bigger focus on a target base, not just in either you're a scope 1, 2 or 3 signee, or you signing up to the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees in terms of individual organisations, of what your procurement strategies. The S element of ESG is actually becoming very, very important within the institutions, and I'm seeing that at first hand. So I think with some targets, and I hate to sometimes say we have to be focused on targets, that I think will also provide, from a whole business perspective, and my focus very much within the UK, a lot more realisation that if we're going to trade and going to do some very strong business, we have to be cognizant of what that means, with gender being very much part of that, and equality and sustainability featuring within the whole green economy, within the whole social and circular economy as well. So I think that's just a snapshot of a business case, because I just didn't know where I was going to follow on from Emily or on from Sue. So I thought I would give some very specific example of where I'm actually at in the here and now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. I love your train set.
Yeah. I actually
Your
think that
train
was a
set quick
perfect
and brilliant.
blend of, the detail on trade, the angle from a women in business point of view, and then a case study. And fascinating to hear that you have built a hydrogen train just for fun, just to show leadership, to show amazing leadership in that climate agenda. I also thought, you know, if you listening to all of us speak, you know, we've got the SDGs. Sue talked about purpose. Mary referenced ESG and circular economy. There's a lot of language we use around this to talk about similar but slightly different things, which I also think is a bit of a challenge for us on a global level. So we have got about another 10 minutes, so I'm going to open it to the floor. You don't need to hear anything more from me. I'm sure you've got loads of questions, so dive in. Or comments, in fact, or tell us a bit about what you're doing. Thank you very much. Maybe you could just say who you are and where you're from to start with.
Hi, I'm Marissa Wigginpole from Bank of Scotland. And I had a question for the panelists. So what has been the biggest challenge that you faced? And then on the bright side, where do you see us in 5 years from now?
Nope. Straight to the big questions. Mary, go on, you start.
Biggest challenge. The biggest challenge I'm facing at the moment in this business, and I'm going to come back to the hydrogen trade, is there are some naysayers in our industry going, what are you doing? You are mad. Why have you just spent £8 million? You must have a purpose for this. And actually, I've got the backing of a board of group of shareholders said, no, just do it because you can show. Because great innovation pushes you to boundaries that you sometimes, you know, have hurdles to get over. And it is tough. But I would say at the moment is actually defining something that hasn't been done yet and saying, yes, we can, then let's start the conversation. But I'm having some challenges at the moment getting the conversation not just started, because there's lots of warm words around this space. It's about the commitment of saying, and what next?
I think my biggest challenge, I did some work with the UN High-Level Panel for Women's Economic Empowerment, which was a lot of very, very effective and very strong organisations, all working to the same goal of economic empowerment for women, but bringing them together and getting them to leave behind their personal agendas, but to work collaboratively, was really hard work at the beginning, because every organisation is passionate about what they do and not quite so passionate about what everybody else does, even though it's very similar. But I do have to say that in the end, we got there. If you've not read the report, you should. It's such a joy when people do start working collaboratively, because we can achieve so much more.
I think developing a progressive trade policy and pushing the progressive trade agenda is difficult because it's new. The World Trade Organization was developed a few decades ago, and unfortunately, as part of its structure, it's almost impossible to change it. Every country in the world has to agree to a change to the World Trade Organization. So what happens is that, you know, Jacinda Ardern will have a meeting in the and being, you know, a little bit more imaginative, a little bit more lateral thinking, a bit more creative, and a bit more brave.
I love that, because my role is around innovation and product development in the space of trade finance. And as a woman, I'm always tempted to stick to where can I be the expert? But I think we have to really apply a growth mindset. So like moving away from trying to be know-it-alls to learn-it-alls. So even if we don't have the right answers, we're doing it for the first time. Just give it a try.
Yeah, yeah.
Half of the Australians that they were going to get to net zero, recognition on behalf of both that you can't just get to net zero, you have to have a pathway down and you have to be accountable on your way down. We can't all be waiting for some time in the future when we may, hopefully, our fairy godmother may turn up and we may end up being at net zero. We need to have a proper plan and we need to have kind of flags going down. And so that was an example of what was hoped to be, I mean, obviously it didn't happen. Famously, it didn't happen, and there are all sorts of leaked emails and a big scandal about it, and, you know, we basically let the Australians off the hook. And so, whilst they have got a plan to get to net zero, you know, the plan that they do have, as Ed has been saying over the weekend, will result, if they were to do it that way, it would be that there would be a warming of the planet between 3 and 4 degrees. So, I mean, obviously it's not the kind of plan that we had agreed, but that's just an example of what you can do within a trade deal. So obviously, a trade deal can almost be the muscle that you have behind foreign policy. And in that way, it can be a force for good.
Mary, did you want to say anything on that?
Well, I think there's a really good example of a similar situation, but not exactly the same one. If you look to America again and supplier inclusion, for major corporations trying to get government contracts, they are questioned on their supplier diversity stats, and they measure it. I mean, as I said, we don't have the data, and until we've got data, we can make no arguments about this. But in America, they do. And the role of minority-owned businesses and women-owned business has risen and become very successful. And it's been a great economic improvement for them. So if they can do it there for that, why can't we do it here for this?
I would agree to that. And Siobhan, you mentioned something earlier about we all have a variation on a theme of what we think green economy or circular economy means. We either talk about ESG, we talk about gender diversity, we talk about a whole host of different things. So we're on multiple platforms, and the simplest way from business perspectives, whether it's in the UK, whether it's international trade, is parameters of how we should trade and what good looks like. And as I said, I'm seeing much more scrutiny from the investor community, but as an example of something that I've found really helpful for us as a business is something called GRESB, and it's the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmarking Exercise, and a number of organisations take part in it globally. There was 549 businesses this year. They look back retrospectively, a whole host of things that you have to be able to validate. You can't just say we will do. You have to showcase very specifically. When I was joined a business, our outstanding results was something like 37% out of 100. We didn't take it seriously. It was seen as an irritation in the organisation. We had much more important things we should be doing, like looking at the P&L and running our business. But in actual fact, what it's done, and has been a huge contributor to our refinancing, maintaining our ratings, is we've gone through 4 years now. We've got this year, we're actually in the 99% out of 100. We're now 4th out in the world globally, because I've taken it seriously. But in that, what I've also got is a really clear framework of what good looks like. And I think if you apply that in anything, what we're talking about this week, on our whole climate targets and our whole green economy, I think we could have a common platform if we're minded to do that amongst, from a global perspective and nations and regions. And I think that one conversation of what are we talking about, as you said earlier, that it's not a variation is really important, because if we all interpret differently, then it lets us off the hook a bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Anita Leviant. I'm the president of the Israel-Britain Chamber of Commerce. It's not my day job, but this is why I'm here. And in my background, I also have banking, and I'm a director in a company that is listed in New York and Israel, and dealing with renewable energies. So this subject is really close to my heart. I mean, the climate issues and the ways to solve it. But we are here for women's sake, which is always a very important and close to heart subject. And I've listened to you all, and it was inspiring, and really from very different angles. And I keep asking myself, how do we take it forward? Because we are here, not too many, but high quality. And I really ask myself, how can we take it forward? Because this is a momentum, a really exciting momentum. I know I've brought here a delegation of 15 people from heavy industry companies that by coming over here, they made a commitment and a statement. But here in this room, we all shared a concern about the future, regulation, acts to be done, women role, very important things that are all together can make a change. So I don't have answers, but my wish is that we shall go out of here and this conference with this specific network that is so powerful that, look, this is a great example, with the vision, but to concretize it, maybe establish a forum. I was always thinking, not always, during the last few weeks, of establishing a forum to going forward on a world basis. But now I think that Women Forum, that will push this with all these angles, with the practical and experience point of view, with the idea of helping women. And I know of so many examples of entrepreneur women that went into a room of private equity funds with their pregnancy, and they were just pushed away like they are having a disease. And with all these important things that you have mentioned regarding what is the trade-off here in the trading?
Yeah, that's great. So what's next? That's a
What's
great
next?
closing
And,
question. How do we
and
keep the momentum up?
I'd like to hear that, and just to sum up, I would be very happy if we could follow up and take this forward.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to help
Thank
and
you.
really take it forward. It strikes like a very good idea. One more thing, like I think the pandemic taught us a very, very important lesson, that we are facing now, these times, issues in a scale that only on a global level can be solved.
Mm.
It's not enough that 2 countries or 50 countries would join the effort. It must be everywhere, because if there is a problem in one place, then it affects us all.
Yeah.
And I think that the climate change thing is very, very similar. So the together thing is not just a word, it's really a must.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Let's do it in reverse. Mary.
Money talks. So in terms of getting access, in terms of rechanging and reperspective, if it's done through, leveraging finance and access to finance, then it's a way. That is a way very quickly on a global platform to get the change and push the momentum, I would say.
Great. Thank you.
I agree, money does talk, but also we talk. Remember I said about this little candle and this beam that we can take across the world. And I said about the high-level panel working separately, but coming together. We need to come together a little bit more, because a strong voice is made of many people. So I think we should talk together more with the British Chamber of Commerce. We should talk to you. I should talk to everybody in the room, because 51% of the population are women.
Emily.
I think your challenge is an important one. I think there is a question of what's next. I think after the Second World War, the international community did come together and did create international bodies and international law and a way of working together, because it needed to immediately after the Second World War. I think that since then, the way in which we have worked as an international community has been pretty weak. But the international community is only ever as strong as it wants to be. The UN can only ever be as strong as particular countries want the UN to be, and all other international bodies is the same. And of course, and that's the problem, is that at the moment, our international bodies are not up to the scale of the problems that we have, frankly, whether that's WTO, whether that's WHO, whether that's UN, whether that's whatever it is. And of course, all of those international bodies are made up of components that are individual countries. And so I think that all that we can really do is to try to make sure that there is enough political space for the politicians within the sovereign nations to say, yes, now is the time we have to get together. And now is the time we have to start taking risks. And we do have friends and we do have support, and it can be done. I really liked your quote from Shakespeare, but it reminded me actually of my favourite quote, which is perhaps about this meeting, she may be small, but she is fierce.
Midsummer Night's Dream.
This meeting may be small, but it is fierce.
She be but little, but she is fierce.
That's it. She may be but little, but she is fierce.
Thank you so much. I think we have heard some amazing ideas, and I think we have started COP26 on an absolute high. So it's about changing the rules of the game, using our trade deals to be that muscle, to be that powerhouse that means we can make change in climate, make change in gender equality, and that we can all have the space to come together to have that really loud voice. So a huge thank you to our panel and a round of applause. Thank you very much.